It's a crazy story that we find here in Daniel. This is the end of kind of the storytelling part, and then it moves into more apocalyptic literature in Daniel's book. And it does lead us to ask some questions about what does it look like to be in power? What does it look like to have influence over others? In my own life, there are a few moments that I know I have ultimate control and the ultimate power, and they mostly come when Holly travels out of town and I have the kids by myself. I get to make all the decisions and all the rules that goes on. There was one week that my wife left to go to San Francisco on a business trip, and she left on a Saturday where I had taken her to the airport, but our kids had on Friday and Saturday and then Sunday morning had gone to my mom's house so we could get Holly ready and send her off on her trip. But that Sunday came along, and they came back from 2 days at Nana's house, which meant they were completely rested and weren't spoiled at all. So my mom brings them, and they get up early so they can be here at church, so they both can go to carol choir and do what is asked of them there. And then they sit through the beginning part of church, and then they go up to Sunday school, and they have a great time there. And then after church gets done, Ida has Dance 149 from 11:30 till 12 noon. And so she goes off and does that. And for most families, that would be a good enough day, and they would just be ready to go home and watch some football in the afternoon and take a nap. But not us. No, we run off from church and have to run and grab a quick lunch so that we can get to the hockey rink by 1 o'clock. Well, really, actually, by about 12:40, so we can get Jack and all his hockey gear and get him out on the ice so he can do his hockey game on Sunday afternoons. When he gets off the ice at 2 o'clock, we send him off to do more practice at the off-ice center. And Ida, we get her ready and get her skates on and get her onto the ice. Well, when she gets done at 3:30, now it really is time to go home, hopefully catch the end of the Lions game, and take a nap. But since Holly was gone and I was not thinking, I had gotten us tickets to go see the Red Wings that evening. It was a relatively early game, but we throw the kids in the car. I don't even let Ida take off her skates. I just carry her under my arm out to the car. And off to Detroit we head. It was a relatively early game, so we came home and we were back home by 10 p.m. Ida slept in the car and Jack could not, though, which meant he was just a little bit tired. I get them to bed, and the next morning I get up and I make lunches and I make breakfast. And I can remember sitting us all around our dining room table talking about what the day is going to bring. I let them know that they got after school care, and then I will be there to pick them up, and then we're going to go get groceries, and then we're going to come home, make dinner, and then off to bed early because you're all tired because you've been at Grandma's house, we had a crazy Sunday, and I want you to be rested so you can learn well at school. And as my daughter is listening to me tell her all the things that are going to happen, she looks at me and she goes, "Why do you get to make all the rules?" And I said, "Because I'm your dad, and I'm here right now, and just listen to me." And she goes, "No, Daddy, you always get all to make all the rules. Why do you?" And I said, "Ida, because I'm your dad, I get to make arbitrary rules for your life, and you have to deal with them." And she did not like this answer. In fact, she let me know about it all the way to school. I dropped him off at school, and as I was driving here to the church, I began to reflect. I began to think about why we make up rules. Why we say, well, we're going to go to bed earlier, or we're going to do this, or this is what you have to eat. Or my absolute favorite as an adult, or as a parent, they'll ask me how many more bites of broccoli I have to take before I get dessert. Well, 4. 4 will offset the pie, right? And I started thinking about that, and there is so much power and influence and even authority in being a parent in that moment. That you make all these rules, you make all these decisions for these little people. And you're trusting and hoping that you're doing it the best for them, but I don't know if I'm always doing that. Sometimes I want them to go to bed 30 minutes early so I can have 30 more minutes of peace by myself before I go to bed. But I tell them it's because you need more sleep, I'm sure of it. But there is something about that power and authority and how we wield and use that. The entire book of Daniel really is a book about power. It's a book that is written to a group of people who are being oppressed. They have an occupying force in their land, and they're asking the question, what does it look like to continue to follow the Torah, to continue to follow this way of God in the midst of being oppressed by these people who have invaded our country? And so they're wrestling with that, the idea of we don't always have the power. We have the kings throughout the book exerting their powers in many different ways. We have King Nebuchadnezzar, who builds a 30-story high statue of himself and then tells the people all around the kingdom, whenever you hear a trumpet blow, bow down to my statue. And then when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego would not bow down, they get thrown in the fiery furnace. We have other kings exerting their powers in different ways. The story of Daniel in the lion's den is probably the most heard story out of this prophecy. It's been taught in Sunday school time and time again, and most of the time we look at it from the lens and from the view of Daniel. Daniel, who is doing the right thing, who is following the ways of God, who gets in trouble for it, and then somehow God rescues him from that. But today I want us to reflect not as if we are Daniel, but what about from the point of the views of the advisors, the precepts, or the governors, the ones who plotted and schemed behind Daniel's back? From the very beginning of this book, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had been living differently than the rest of the advisors. The Babylonians in particular were a group of people, when they would conquer a land, they would take the best, the brightest, the most handsome, and the beautiful, and they would bring them and give them seats of power and raise them up to be advisors to the kings. And so these people that are surrounding the king are probably, some might be Babylonians, but many of them would be from other countries that had been conquered by the Babylonians. Then we notice Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego acting very differently than the rest. In fact, this book, Daniel, opens with the story of these 4 young men, strapping young men, best and brightest from Judah, coming in, and they're offered the best food and drink that Babylon has to offer. And they say, no, that's against what we are called to do as good Jewish men. Let us only eat fruits and vegetables. And the people that are watching over them, with, you can't grow healthy, you can't grow big and strong by just eating vegetables. And they said, let us try it for a while and see what happens. Then we have Daniel here as well. He is such a devout Jew that he goes and prays 3 times a day. The Torah actually only requires a Jewish person to pray twice a day. But here, Daniel decides to go above and beyond what he is called to do. And so as Daniel has risen through the ranks, becomes more and more of a trusted advisor and a loved and much beloved by King Darius, these other colleagues are rubbed the wrong way. They decide they're going to begin to plot and scheme against Daniel. They use all their power and influence to make a new law, a law they knew that Daniel could not follow, because every day he went and he prayed to his own God. And so they take this decree before King Darius. Said, for 30 days, let us just pray to you, no other gods, no other human beings. Was it King Darius's hubris, or was it ignorance that made him sign this decree into law? It really doesn't matter, because the advisors of the kings used their power and the influence to put Daniel at risk. They used their power to get rid of this competition and really serve their own interests best. There is something that we can say that power is dangerous. The power and influence, it can be used to make the society a better place, to help people, or we can let it go to our heads and use it to our own benefit and to destroy others. In our New Testament reading, we have Jesus standing before Pilate near his death. And Pilate is asking him, are you actually going to be a king like all these other kings? Are you going to start a violent revolt and kick us out? Or are you doing something different? See, Jesus was going to rise to a throne, but he wasn't going to rise to that throne by taking the life of the previous king. He was actually going to do it by sacrificing his own life. In that moment, we can see the upside-down nature of God's kingdom, where power and influence and authority does not look out for their own gain, but looks out to how they can serve the marginalized, the disenfranchised, and the hopeless. See, in both of these stories, we have Daniel, we have Jesus right before his death, are offering hope to the hopeless. They're offering grace to the guilty, mercy to the humble, and love for everyone. We stand here on the first week of Advent as we lit the first candle of hope. We recognize there are those who are without hope and who are powerless today. See, in Advent, we don't just look forward to the baby coming in Bethlehem, but we also look forward to Christ's second coming, when Christ's rule will come on earth as it is in heaven. And that is the hope that we have. The hope that God is doing something new, not just someday, but through us right here and now. Because we do have power, we do have authority, and we do have influence. Whether great or small, however you might look at that, we do all have those places in our lives, whether in our home, in our schools, our workplace, our communities, or even in the political arenas. We have power and authority, whether it might be just telling your kids when to go to bed, or it might be making a new law that will come into effect. We do have power and influence. And the question that Daniel raises for us is, how are we going to use that authority, influence, and power that has been given to us? Are we going to use it for our own good, to only bolster ourselves and our own benefit, for our own even financial gain? Or are we going to be like Christ, with loving sacrifice, reach out in hope and peace for the world? See, we have been called to be a people of hope, and then we've all been given places of authority, influence, and power. And Christ calls us to bring hope, to bring justice to those places.